Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details. With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Look, I think strike rate's very, very overrated.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strike Rate, the cricket analytics podcast with me, Jack Hope, and Dan Weston. On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about drafts and auctions and what happens in them. Last week, we talked about how to prepare and the strategizing that happens prior to it all kicking off. But obviously, once the show's on the road, things can get a little bit hairy, can't they, Dan? How are you doing? And, how are you doing?
Yeah, no, really, really good, mate. Thank you. Looking forward to doing this episode. I think it's going to be hopefully a really good chat about the sort of second part of the draft and auction dynamics and how it pans out when you're actually at the event.
So I think the first question I've got for you, before I ask the first question, what I will actually do is just remind people to like and subscribe and leave a comment and follow you on Twitter at SA Advantage if they want to ask a question, and remind people that the format of the show is a little discussion between Dan and I, followed by quite a few questions from our listeners on this one. We've got 7 or 8, so a lot of interaction. But the first question related to our actual topic is like when you get into that room or you're at the draft booth, as it looked like in the 100, the table at the auction. What are you feeling from a completely non-analytical point of view? You've done all your pre-auction stuff. You're there. You're wearing your team uniform or whatever it is. What's your headspace? Do you do any preparation before you get there?
Well, in terms of like visualization and things,
yeah,
like that.
Or mindfulness.
I did a bit in the 100 draft because actually we did like a mock draft the day before the actual draft where that is, you're testing the technology and stuff like that. So you're in the booths, you understand what the lighting's like in the room and how it's all kind of shaped in like a horseshoe layout basically. So you kind of understand like where you might be in relation to other teams and things like that. So there were certainly some stuff that you could grasp a little bit before the event, which I personally like. I like having information and I like being able to process stuff visually in advance. So that was good for me. That draft in 2019 was my first draft that I did. So I think it's probably normal that you're going to be a little bit nervous about it, especially as it's going out live on Sky Sports and stuff like that, and there's going to be probably people judging you for decisions that may or may not be your responsibility. And ultimately, yeah, you're going to be nervous, but as long as you prep well, I don't think it's too bad. And I think that the level of prep that you do ahead of an event like a draft or an auction really does determine how you feel walking into the room. So I remember when I did the mega auction 2022 at the IPL, I can promise you this right now, hand on heart, and my heart's My heart's still weak, but I'll put my hand up and say I wasn't nervous, because literally, if anyone, I felt that if anyone else had done the level of prep that we'd done, then they deserved to beat us. Simple as that. Like I was really at peace with the work that we'd done ahead of the auction, and so therefore, what's the point of being nervous? Because you've literally done everything that you can. You've backed yourself. You think that you're a good person to do this job. You've done all the hard work. Just go and execute it. It's quite straightforward. And so, then definitely, the more you do them, the less nervous you get, and the more you just kind of view them as a routine day kind of thing.
So, follow-up questions to that, and this relates to probably most people's experience of auctions or drafts. So I'm thinking here fantasy sports. Particularly the American ones, where you'll play the group of mates and you'll have a roster to fill and all the players from the NFL or whatever. And the site you're on, what generally happens is it will rank the players in order, in like a simulated draft order, with the most valuable being at number 1 and the least value being at 2,500. And then you sort of go from there.
Yeah.
How similar to that experience is the real thing?
I don't think it's similar to that at all, because I don't think that there's nearly the level of scrutiny on cricket picks as there is in American sports, basically. And I would like to see more scrutiny. I would like to see, the headline of a newspaper being, I don't know, Manchester Originals make shock 125k purchase of Dane Villas. It would like the first auction or something like that, because that's scrutiny. That's what I want to see. I want accountability and I want scrutiny in cricket. We don't really get it. And actually, on a side note, I do think that kind of the level of analysis in T20 drafts and auctions from broadcasters should be so much better.
Cool. Let's get into the nuts and bolts a little bit then. You're in the auction, you're in the draft, you know where you know what your priority targets are, you know where you're going to be picking if it's a draft. As a general point here, what's your priority focus at the outset of the event? Like, are you thinking about this from the perspective of somebody who has to feel, has 3 main priorities? I have to get a batter who can bowl a little bit of off spin. Or are you thinking, a slightly bigger picture here? Or are you thinking later rounds, like I'll see what I can do early and then I'll prove my value later in the draft?
No, I think the most important thing actually is staying level and sticking to the kind of semi-flexible plan that you've developed in advance, rather than getting emotional. And there are different ways of doing that. So if actually anyone's got they're bored enough to do it, they can go back and look at the bids in the 2020 mega auction and see which teams had the most successful bids for the players that they bid on. So, for example, you might buy 20 players, but you might bid on 40, so that's like a 50% success rate. But I know that there was one team who bid on like 70 players, so they were like completely scattergun and maybe didn't have that coherent plan, and maybe did get drawn into emotion very, very quickly. So for me, that's important. I'm not looking at it from like we didn't get him, that's disaster point of view. I'm like, okay, so how do we reassess from that? And the auction environment is actually really good, because there's a lot of, you probably don't see it on TV, but there's actually quite a lot of dead patches where you can really kind of gather your thoughts and maybe run a few numbers and then have a quick chat between a few people. There's breaks quite often, but also there might be like, say there's a round of 8 players, but you're only interested in one, he's drawn out first, and you're not interested in the next 7. You've got like 20 minutes to work out a strategy to deal with the player who you missed out on. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's a lot of patches where maybe you're not intensively involved in the auction process, that you've got time to then chat about implications of certain decisions and things like that.
So what you're saying here is that once you've done your preparation, you actually need to not park it, but you need to be aware that what you're involved in is a living beast. It's going to evolve. It's going to go down routes that you maybe didn't think. You might not get the player that you wanted. You might not get the batting off spinner or the batter who can bowl a little bit of off spin, and you might have to come up with a different plan. And part of the preparation is being open to that possibility and having that game tree or that decision tree partly mapped out already.
Yeah, 100%. And so, look, if anyone goes into an auction, especially a mega auction, and says, all right, I want him, and him, right? And no matter what, we're going to pay it. They're gonna have a lot of problems because they're going to bid absolute fortunes for those 5 and have like a load of junk otherwise, apart from them. So you've got to be flexible. You can't be fixated on one player. That's for me. That's just crazy.
And to follow that up, then, and this is something that you noted down as a topic that you wanted to touch on, like game theory. Like, first of all, you're gonna have to explain this in 2 parts. So you're gonna have to explain to the listeners what we mean by game theory, and then you're gonna have to explain how that applies to an auction or to a draft.
Okay, so basically, for me, the way I look at it will be, how do the decisions that you make influence other teams? Or how do decisions that they make influence your thinking? So, for example, I played a lot of poker, and I spoke about this in one of the earlier episodes, and that actually the tournament dynamic of poker is very, very similar to the auction dynamic of, say, the IPL, multi-day event, few breaks, a few patches where maybe you're not going to be at the forefront of the activity. And the thing with poker in the tournament is that a big stack rules, because if you've got the biggest stack on the table, you can't be eliminated in a tournament. It's impossible, because no one's got the chips that can match you. So the worst they can do is damage you. They can't break you. And my theory, which I worked on a lot actually, in terms of this kind of game theory situation, was that there were a lot of traps in rounds 1, 2, 3. In the early rounds, you could lose the auction very, very quickly, but you couldn't win the auction. That was clear to me, and so it was almost worth steering clear of, especially the first 2 rounds, to be that big stack subsequently, and then bully teams later on because of your decision making in an early round. So the conscious thought theory is that, okay, actually we're gonna hold fire a little bit. We're gonna sit on our hands. We're gonna might pick 1 or 2 bargains up, but that's about it. Yeah, and we're gonna have, I don't know, 60 crore when everyone else has got 20 or 5 or 30 to push them around later on. And so it's implications of their decisions and a conscious point on your part to take advantage of those decisions that other teams have made.
So to follow that up, and I think for the last question in part 1, you're trying to plan that out. What happens if another team does something that is completely unexpected? So I'm going to give you a hypothetical question here, and we talked about this in part 1. And you said when you were game planning the auction in 2021, you were pretty sure that Mumbai Indians were going to go in heavy on Ishan Kishan, and that would leave them in a situation where buying bowlers was going to be difficult, and in fact negotiating the rest of the auction was going to be difficult. What if Mumbai Indians put the paddle down and Sunrisers Hyderabad bought Ishan Kishan, and you're looking at an entirely different auction?
Well, if memory serves me correctly, they should have pushed Mumbai harder for it. I think there was a lot of times where Sunrisers ended up being the kind of inadvertent big stack in that mega auction 22, and then sort of gave up too early on the bidding of a player rather than wielding their stack to push teams around a little bit. So yeah, that would have been an interesting one for sure. But look, teams do things that are unexpected all the time, but there's degrees of unexpectation. I use the 2019 draft example of Dane Villas at Manchester earlier. I don't think anyone in the room expected that. And the image of Joss Butler on TV went pretty viral after that as well, his face. And so I guess it's a bit like what they say on Moneyball. Like if a team makes mistakes, you take it, right? But in terms of Ishan Kishan with Mumbai, I mean, I was pretty sure that they were going to go heavy on him. If they hadn't have done it, then you're thinking, okay, well, what is their tactic? So you've got to keep an eye on what the implications of them not bidding high on Ishikishin. Are they looking to pick up another domestic batter? Is who in the remaining list of players could that player be for them to target? How will that implicate your decision making on that player in particular? Or are they cognizant of the fact that if they spend all this money on Ishikishin, they can't buy good bowlers? So could it be that they're now going to go harder on bowlers? So there's a few ways that then their decision tree can go from not having bid on Ishikishin to start with. So yeah, teams do things that are unexpected all the time. The critical thing, if you're a rival team, is one, to gratefully receive the mistakes that they make, but two, if it is unexpected, but a good decision from them, how do you counteract that in later rounds?
So in that example, if Mumbai hadn't bid on Ishan Kishan, that would, I guess, inflate the price of bowlers in that IPL mega auction, and possibly you would have to factor that into all of your bids moving forward. So you might have said, cut off the bidding on Rabada. I think you picked up Rabada in that auction. It was 10 crore, but now we're going to stretch to 12 because we know that there's a little bit more money on the table in this section of the auction.
Or that player might now be like the last really good player in that particular skill set. So they for example, might pass up Ishikishin, but there might only be one good wicketkeeper batter from a domestic pool left in the entire auction. So then the valuation of that player probably has inflated because of that decision.
Absolutely. Right, Dan, we're going to take a really quick break. I've got a handful more questions for you, and then we're going to just pick up what we received from the listeners in part 3.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? I kind of like the high five, but if you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. At ChumbaCasino.com, choose from hundreds of social casino-style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses, so don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hello and welcome back to Strike Rate, the cricket analytics podcast with me, Jack Hope, and Dan Weston. We've been talking, Dan, about what happens during an auction. We've been mainly focusing on auctions. So we might as well lean into that. But if you've got some examples from drafts or you want to bring drafts in, please do. I think something that everyone would love to know is what are the discussions that take place, either in your sort of 90-second slot when it's your draft pick, or when you're mid-bid and there's a player up for sale in that auction.
I think in a draft, you're a lot of the time you're probably 95+% sure what you're going to do as the clock starts. So it's just reaffirming that that's the decision that you want to take. You know that you should be in a position where you know that if a certain player gets to you at that stage, then that's the one you want, because you've got the decision trees all in front of you basically in that situation. Especially in a mini draft where you're picking like say 4 players, that's easily done. So it always blows my mind a little bit in drafts when you have 2 minutes to make a decision, and teams go into the last 10 seconds. It's like, what have you been doing for the last month, basically? Or like, there's been actually times I think with a team in the 100 draft, and I'm pretty sure that there's been times where a team didn't realise it was their turn, which is pretty crazy. In an auction, look, I think sometimes it's probably fair to say there might be a little bit of theatre involved as well in the bidding process, and you might not just be talking about the valuation of a player.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, I'm going to pose a scenario to you here, and I want to hear what your thought process would be. Basically in this scenario, let's say it's a draft, and you need to fill. You want one more spinner. Maybe there'll be a bench player. Maybe they'll play one or two of the matches at the right venue, but it's a defined role that you want to fill. What do you do if a better player that would usurp one of the 11 or one of the other 10 players in your team or one of the 11 players in your team is unexpectedly available, and you're pretty sure they're an above average player? Do you say, I'll sacrifice that role-based pick for the good player, or do you stick to your guns in that scenario and take the person who fits the role?
For me, I'm quite role-oriented generally. So there might be, for example, a necessity to pick a spinner who matches up against right-handers. And then suddenly, I don't know, there's not really many of them, but like a gun-off spinner comes along that you don't expect. But actually, it might completely unbalance your squad. So that's actually a really good example of the kind of name recognition and sort of reputational bias that can come into a team making a mistake at a pressurized moment, because they might be like, oh wow, he's available, I didn't think about that, he's great, but actually he's not the player you need at all. He might be just completely surplus to your requirements. So I think, and it's interesting because I get messaged a lot by agents offering me players and stuff all the time, and actually quite a commonplace occurrence for me to reply will be like something like, good player but doesn't fit in with what we need right now. And I think it's really important, because I'm not looking to accumulate 11 good players. I'm looking to accumulate a team that can work together to try and provide every on-pitch solution I think we need.
If it's a really extreme example of this, like, I don't know, you have Glenn Maxwell and you have Shimron Hetmeyer and you have Tim David, but Liam Livingston is unexpectedly available. But what you really need is the bang average left arm spinner. Like, Livingston might be a bad example. Livingston who can't bowl, because he obviously could fill that role as well. Do you take just Livingston's batting here, and say, look, I think that it will unbalance us, but the value added is so high?
Yeah, and obviously you're just using hypothetical names here, but yeah, I wouldn't want to pick the player who is surplus to what we've already got.
Okay.
It's because, I mean, there's no use sitting on the bench, is he? Because you've already got like all those other options. Or you might have to completely tear up the entire balance of the squad that you've trying to create over the last 2 months just because some player is unexpectedly available. I mean, that happens all the time in auctions, right? There's players that you were like, that went for big money, and we might not rest the paddle because we realize that actually they're not going to be the right player for us at that point in time. Doesn't mean to say that you don't rate them. It just means to say that they're not right for you at that given moment. And again, I refer back to what we talked about earlier about how some teams bid on an insane amount of players. And that's where maybe you can work out who is just bidding on who the player is rather than a coherent squad identity.
Yeah. Two really quick questions to finish off from me then, Dan. What's the biggest mistake you've ever seen a team make in an auction or draft you've been involved in?
I don't want to refer to individuals. I think we've done that a little bit already, actually. But okay, so here's a few things that they might do. 1, make emotional decisions. 2, rely massively on recency bias. 3, buy players and skill sets that they don't need. I mean, there's a huge list. I can't even think about half of them. not do due diligence on availability. I mean, there's so many I can't even think off the top of my head, but there's like a good, this, you see it in every single auction, basically.
Yeah. And final one, when the auction's finished, what in your view does a successful auction look like?
One that you've stuck to the processes with.
Even if you didn't get the exact players that you wanted?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can only do what you set out to do in advance and then adjust it as the event goes on. If the cards don't fall your way, sometimes you just have to accept that.
Great. Dan, we're going to wrap up there. Just a reminder to everyone listening and watching, make sure you click and subscribe and follow. If you want to ask a question in one of our future episodes, follow Dan and myself on Twitter. I'm at JackHope0 and Dan is at SA Advantage. And you should also listen to the Cricket Podcast, which is the sister podcast, the original. 480 episodes of topical cricket discussion, obviously in the middle of the India-England series at the moment. We're recording this a week in advance, so I don't know what's happened in the fourth test, but we are recording it just after England have been battered in the third test. So let's assume it's 3-1 and ask, can England do anything in the final test to salvage some pride? We'll be back after the break with your questions. Hello and welcome back to Strike Rate, the Cricket Analytics podcast with me, Jack Hope, and Dan Weston. It's time for your questions, and we got a bunch in. So a big thank you to everyone that contacted us on Twitter, on Substack, on LinkedIn, by post. No, just by post, but if you find out where we live, we'll probably take the question. First one from Falling Sweep on Twitter. Last year, Rajasthan Royals. So we're talking the mega auction, I think, last year.
Auction,
yeah. Rajasthan Royals kind of went crazy in a 12 or 15 minute period and acquired 4 or 5 overseas players. What were your thoughts on these acquisitions?
I kind of remember this quite well, actually. I realised that they'd put themselves in a position where they really didn't have a lot of money left to fill quite a lot of overseas spots. So what they did, it became something that I anticipated that they would do. Do I think it was a good planning strategy? No, probably not. They might argue differently. Personally, I felt that they just had to go and pick up players at the last minute because of the implications of the decisions that they made earlier in the auction.
I think it's an interesting one with the whole dynamic of overseas players. We talked about this in the previous episode, which you should go back and listen to. There is something to be said, I think. That their case was quite extreme, but I think there is something to be said, particularly in the IPL, for picking up at least 2 bargain basement overseas players, because they're relative to the good domestic players so much less valuable, but still extremely capable cricketers.
Yes.
Once you get to the 80th best Indian player in the draft, or in the auction, you're probably looking at someone quite significantly worse than a 1 crore option from West Indies who can fill a couple of roles. Would be my guess. We had a question as well from Erica Morris, who is on Twitter and actually is worth a follow if you're into stats. 2 questions, so I'll ask the first and the second. Who is the best player you've ever drafted or bought in an auction, Dan?
Oh wow, that's like an incredible question. I don't know if I even could answer that because.
Well, maybe can I rephrase it slightly? Who is the player that you drafted that then went on to vindicate that decision most?
I mean, it's all very relative in terms of expectation. So, I think in the 2019 100 draft, for example, Birmingham Phoenix bought Liam Livingstone first pick, 125 grand. Now, there was a lot of reasons as to why that pick was made, and I think it raised a fair few eyebrows at that point in time. But then he went out and got MVP in the first season, so that did kind of obviously vindicate that pick. In terms of in a draft, I would say that the player that I've really been we've got to get him, and we could get him a cost-effective price at a young stage of his development as a player would be Will Smeed, because I was just so convinced that he was going to be a very, very good player, and I'd been following him for a long time, what he was doing, and obviously then he got the first 100 in the 100, which was obviously a really satisfying moment when that happened as well. In terms of the IPL, I mean, actually, I can't really even take that much credit for this piece of recruitment, but I think 20 lakh on Jitesh Sharma probably doesn't get much better than that. A guy who you buy for base price, and he's playing for the national team within a year or two. So that was a pretty good bit of business. In terms of the best value for money purchase ever, I actually did a bit of research because I knew this question was coming in advance. 10 years ago, almost to the day, Mumbai bought Jasprit Bumrah for 1.2 crore.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That is pretty good. So thanks, Erica, for your question or questions. The second part of that was about value for money, and so I think you picked that up.
That's the value for money, but yeah.
In your answer there. So Suhas on Twitter says, does recency bias play a part during recruitment through drafts and auction? I'm guessing the answer to this is yes.
Yeah, we're in the year 2024 and still leagues have been going on for a long time now. Yeah, recency bias still plays a massive part in recruitment. Stuff like World Cup performances will influence, say, IPL auction. Performances against India will also have a big influence, and also like some teams seem to always have like a series against India about 2 weeks before the auction starts, which is always an interesting one. It gets a few players noticed, that's for sure.
I've got a bit of a theory on this as well. I think that when we talk about cricket from a narrative point of view, form is something that we're obsessed with in a way that we aren't so obsessed in other sports, where I think people are much more aware of the fact that good games, and maybe not more aware of, but the actual narrative device form doesn't come into things, and players have good games and bad games, and they're kind of at random, and people just sort of accept that. In cricket, we're obsessed with that batter's in form, that batter isn't in form. And so I think people see somebody do well, they think that player is in form, and therefore they think that they will continue to do well. But that, isn't how these things work. So
if you buy a player who's done well in like the month before the IPL auction, there's probably a pretty high chance you're not getting a good deal.
Yeah. Cricket on your screen on Twitter says, since being on the Phoenix draft table, how have draft tactics been utilised by coaches who were majorly part of auctions previously? So I think that's a question of like, what's the different dynamic there, and do coaches who have experience in an auction apply that to a draft in a way that might not be fully as applicable?
I think the majority of 100 coaches have done auctions and drafts, so I think they've got experience in both environments. And certainly, I would say that they're quite aware of the mini draft dynamics in terms of it being similar to mini auctions, when you might have to overpay a little bit for a certain skill set because of the scarcity of resources. So yeah, no, I don't think there's any problems in that area at all. Actually, I think that the coaches are pretty aware.
Rye Jones on Twitter says, one of my favourite auction memories was you at the IPL table gesturing no to bidding for Moises Henriques late in the auction. How difficult is the dynamic of auction and drafts when different people at the table want different players?
Wow, I didn't actually realise that that was also obvious. But look, I think that this is a really good example, actually, of why you plan in advance for stuff, like why you've got depth charts and things like that. So then you can, there might be a bit of miscommunication, but you can quickly nip that in the bud with quick shove of the laptop screen in front of someone's face or something like that. It's different people around the table by this point shouldn't want different players, because this should all have been ironed out in advance. Whether that actually does happen or not is certainly a different question. Personally, I'd be pretty disappointed in a scenario where if that happened regularly with the team that I was involved in. It has happened, and maybe in my position, someone who's got pretty strong feelings about a certain player or a certain role, and yet perhaps sometimes lack clout in terms of decision making, would say that maybe you have to pick your battles a little bit sometimes. You might have to let someone get something to get what you want, what you perceive to be more important, if that makes sense.
Have you ever...
From memory, sorry, the Henriquez thing, I think was quite towards the end of the auction, I think.
Yeah.
I think we'd had another player in mind, I think, at that point.
Have you ever heard of the concept of crew resource management in aviation?
Yeah, I certainly haven't.
So in a plane's cockpit, there's basically a set of procedures and training that are in place for situations where human error could have a devastating effect, and crew resource management is used for improving safety, and it focuses on the communication between the captain, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer if you've got one, or the training pilot if there is a training pilot on board. Who's in charge and who is ultimately the person that makes the decision. Yeah. So if something goes wrong, what everyone's job is. Like, that person will check this, that person will fly the plane, that person makes the decision about what the next course of action is. And there are a couple of examples. I mean, like the Air France plane that crashed into the sea between Brazil and Paris. This was an example of where it broke down and the wrong person was flying the plane and wasn't explaining what they were doing. Before, it's a little bit of a long-winded way to get to the question, but it was important that we understood where it was. Before you get to an auction or a draft, do you have a discussion about that with the coach or the owner or whatever, so that you know what the process is, what the crew resource management process is on that table or in that auction? Or is it a little bit more of a free-for-all, a little bit more of an art?
I'll definitely say in the IPL, when you've got maybe 8, 9, 10 people around a table, it's probably a bit more of a free-for-all. Ultimately, unless you're prepared to get physical, you probably the person with the paddle in their hand that's going to have the final say. So kind of that's inferred from the start, right? In a draft with us, there's 3 people in a pod. It's much more sort of straightforward, I think, in terms of everyone knows their roles and kind of how the consensus is going to develop, basically.
Cool. That's interesting. So I know for a fact that in American sports, they'd have that process in place. They would have somebody who did those things.
For cricket to take then, right, from American sports.
Well, I mean, this goes back. I think you were talking about this at the beginning of the last episode about how some owners are doing it kind of as a hobby, and do they really want to be studying aviation before they go and applying that example with before they go and sit down at an auction table? Maybe the ones that really want to win will, but maybe some won't. Dan, last question. This is from Ronnie on LinkedIn. Can you discuss the importance of balancing star players with emerging talents in drafts or auction selections, and how teams assess player value relative to their budget constraints?
Wow, good question. Look, I'm not probably as oriented towards name players as a lot of other people. I'm just as happy to make stars as buy stars. And for me, I think we talked a bit about it earlier in terms of emerging talents, and that depends where you are in the auction cycle and whether you want to win now or you want to future-proof the team as well. I definitely think that you talk about balancing star players with emerging talents. I do strongly believe that your star players or more experienced players need to be good role models and good mentors to the younger players to help them integrate into a group and show them the standards that are required to succeed at the highest level. So you've got to bear all those factors in mind if you're trying to do things really, really well. How teams assess values of players relative to their budget constraints, well, I think that all goes down into the planning aspect of everything, really. You know, if you're thorough, certainly in an auction, you know roughly how much a player is going to be worth, and then how much the player is going to be worth to you. Now, that might change a little bit as the auction goes on, but on the whole, you should be pretty prepped for everything in advance. And the same with drafts, really, as well. You're not going to suddenly buy a player for in the second round of a draft that you originally planned to buy in round 10 or something like that. That's the player's relative. The player's relative value won't have changed that much. So budget constraints is, you shouldn't have to have budget constraints in an auction a lot of the time if you're smart with how you spend stuff as well. I mean, also we used the Rajasthan example of them buying like 4 or 5 overseas players for not very much money later on in the auction, but that's because they were budget constrained. But as I said earlier, with the sort of big stack strategy, maybe you can avoid that.
Dan, I've got 2 more questions for you, which weren't from listeners, but I'm paraphrasing one that I did see. It's a hypothetical. So if you had 30 seconds to make a draft pick for a batter, which metric, you can have one metric here. Which metric are you using?
Oh, that's
one
harsh,
metric. One metric. You can rank all the players in the world, but this is the thing that you're going to rely on. What's your weapon of choice?
T20.
Yeah, in T20. Yeah.
I'll go boundary percent, but I hate picking one metric.
No, I'm just it's a hypothetical. I know that.
Yeah. No, at the end of the day, 5% of T20 games are won by the team that hit more boundaries than the other team, percentage-wise.
And bowling, same question. Is it boundary prevention, or are you going to take wickets or something like that?
Just kind of boundary prevention and 2s and 3s prevention and stuff like that. Yeah, all that sort of the 2+ prevention, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Dan, it's been a pleasure as always. People can find Strike Rate the Cricket Podcast on YouTube. They can find it on Apple. They can find it on iTunes. You can find them in all those places. Subscribe on all of those places, please. We release shows every Tuesday. We take questions for the next topic, and we post that up on Twitter. You can find Dan's Twitter at @SAAdvantage or mine at JackHope0. We haven't decided next week's topic. We should, in future, Dan, remember to do that so that we can prompt people to ask questions on a certain topic, or at least think about them. So for the final week that we forget, you're going to have to go to Twitter to check that out, or on Substack or LinkedIn, or wherever you're interacting with us. Please do also tell anyone that you think would be interested. And that pretty much sums it up. Hope you enjoyed it, and goodbye.
Sports Social Podcast Network.